Hello and greetings. In this video I'm going to discuss a Gorean topic. And the topic I want to discuss is one that is heavily debated among many Goreans, and that is whether or not Goreans should engage in BDSM. Now let me clarify that in my opinion the Gorean lifestyle is not part of BDSM. And I might make a video about that at a later point explaining why, but in depth. But generally the concept is this, that yes, you can say that the slavery aspect of the Gorean lifestyle is part of DS, which in turn is part of BDSM, so you can say there's a link there, but the Gorean lifestyle is not about slavery. It is about living with honor and living according to a certain set of principles and philosophies. And while slavery is a part of it, it is a small part of it. So therefore I say it's not part of BDSM. Now when people discuss this, what they mean is, should Goreans do pain play? Should Goreans basically hurt one another for pleasure? And the point that very many have a tendency to get hung up on is that in the Gore books it says that a Gorean master, while strict, is seldom cruel. And first of all, that quote does not say a master who wants to be cruel can't be. It says a master while strict is seldom cruel. And first of all, we have to define what cruelty is, because there's a lot of things that happens in the Gore books that me, according to my personal morality, would consider to be pretty cruel. For example, you have one scene in Witness, I'm pretty sure it's Witness, yeah, where they have some free people talking and there's a slave on the ground and there's a lot of yada yada yada, and you have an ear-piercing scene. And I mean, I think the Gore books are about the only pieces of fiction that I have seen that manages to make poking holes in your ears sexy. But anyway, so the one of the free men holds the slave out over a cliff and says, I can let you go at any time. I can let you go. It doesn't, but anyway, that kind of mindfuck, I say cruel. And while there are no direct examples of scenes with it, there are a lot of places where it's mentioned things like slave girls being tied to oars as punishment, slave girls being used to fish giant sea monsters, slave girls being used to hunt for sleens, which are basically giant six-legged tigers, slave girls being used for beginning metal workers to learn how to do brands, so they just brand them over and over again till they can do it pretty. That if a slave isn't pretty enough or does a good enough job to please their master, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of those things that many would consider to be cruel, including, I think, that for some people running around, picking people up, kidnapping them into UFOs, sending them to another planet, branding them, making them slaves, and raping them all day. I think some people would define that under cruel. So we have to define here what is cruelty. Compared to that, I would say that if somebody wants to tie their respective partner down and spank them while sex, it doesn't really get very far up the scale. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but being used as bait for fishing sea monsters, being spanked, what the cruelness factor of one sort of seems higher. But of course, and you can say, but because I took that point up with a few Goreans who said, yeah, but for all these things there are reasons. And often the reason is it pleases the free to do so. It please the free to press the point in on the slave that he could drop her off a cliff. And that's fair and good, but what if it pleases the free to spank or do other sort of BDSM activities with their slave? That's the point. The second, basically, the point is that even if you say that having the desires are not ideal according to Gorean philosophy, then the desires are there, they are part of you, and part of knowing yourself and being yourself would be then to do the things that speaks to you. And then if the master is interested in BDSM and you get his rocks off at inflicting pain on his slave, then that is pleasing the free and should be no more considered cruelty. If it's okay to say, okay, it pleases this free person. In the books, of course, we're talking here that if you're going to use them as the model here and say that it's okay that this person that brands a slave again and again and again, that's okay, that's not cruelty, because it serves the master by allowing his skills to grow. I'm completely with that concept, that if you say then that's not cruelty. How is it then said it's cruelty to say for a master, okay, I enjoy whipping someone because I get sexual pleasure from it? How is one of these things cruelty and the others isn't? So I say then, you really have to define to yourself what cruelty is, and by the definition that very many Goreans go by, that if it pleases the free and if it has any purpose behind it, it isn't cruelty, then BDSM will go definitely go under that. A second point is that it is mentioned a few times in the books that some free enjoys ordering their slaves to whip them and basically top them during sex. So obviously it isn't considered cruelty when it's the other way around. It should also be mentioned that John Norman, who has written the Gore books, has published a manual on BDSM. So if you're going by author, he obviously isn't that against it. So yeah. And secondly, you have to consider, is BDSM cruelty? Because in most cases, both parties want it. Now, I do realize that if you have a total power exchange relationship, and the slave isn't paying release and so on, you could have a situation where I know a few people who are in that situation that she isn't really into it. She doesn't like paint plates, she doesn't like these kinds of things, but she does it in service of her master. And then I guess you can see it a little bit more towards cruelty. But if both parties enjoy it, and very often both parties do, how is it then cruelty? Now, the concept behind that comment in the Gore books, as far as I know, is that it's the idea that a lot of the extreme things in sexual desires. I'm not talking about the want for sexual dominance, a bit of spanking and so on, because that seems to have been part of. We have pretty old paintings that show these things. It's not something new. But there's a lot of that indicates that the more extreme parts that you could say is detrimental has increased with sexual repression. And that in a society, as you would find in the fictional world of Gore, where you don't have sexual repression, that you won't have those extreme displays. Now, of course, I think that you would, but you would have a lot less of it. Because some people will have these desires. And really, the main focus of the Gore philosophy, if you want, is that you should be true to yourself, who you really are. And as such, if you have those desires, that's one thing. But yes, I do think that if there were a society like Gore with its giant cockroaches and spaceships, then there would be less people who took it to the extreme. A second point for that comment is that basically it wouldn't really make sense for most owners of slaves to be cruel, because generally an unhappy slave is a very little productive one, especially if you want this slave for sex. Then you want somebody who desires you, and generally a happy person is more desirable. Secondly, doing harm to a slave would cost you resources, because either then you have to hire a physician to heal them, or you have to abandon them or kill them, which would then cost you the slave. So basically, from a practical point of view, being cruel to a slave just for the sake of being cruel doesn't make sense. It's like most people don't smash their computers with sledgehammers because they get annoyed by them, because it makes no sense, because chances are the computer will then be destroyed, or at least so damaged that you have to pay a lot of money to have it fixed. It doesn't make sense, and that's one reason too not to have cruelty. But like I said, I don't view BDSM as cruelty, especially when both parties involved enjoy it. And even if both parties do not enjoy it, basically Gorean slavery is voluntary. It means that people can ask for release, and in most relationships that's enough to be released. So if somebody stays with their master, even if they might not be too into it themselves, they are generally happy with the situation, though it might be this one element I don't like. And that is comparable with a vanilla relationship, where you might have that your hobby might be into boating, and you just think boating is the most boring thing that have ever existed. But you go out with picnics on the boat with him and so on, because that's what people do, and he might go with you to see the newest horror movies that you like to watch, even if he doesn't like them, because it's part of having a relationship. Of course, now I'm talking about a romantic relationship, and that might not be with a Gorean master-slave relationship, but you get the point. They're still happy enough to stay. So no, in my personal opinion, being Gorean and identifying as Gorean is no good reason to not do BDSM if you feel that is something that interests you. I don't see anything in the philosophy that says BDSM is bad. There's some indication that the author thinks that in a world like Gore, then pain play and so on would be less common. But that doesn't mean it's bad or wrong according to the philosophy. It just means the idea that this will be less common, it would be less frequent, so that it's not likely that if you get kidnapped by said UFO and placed on Gore, that you will end up having the skin flogged off your back for the sexual pleasure of whoever owns you. Could happen, and it doesn't say that it's necessarily wrong, but it's not likely to happen. There's where I think the whole misunderstanding lies. It doesn't say the master is seldom cruel because being cruel is bad. It just says Gorean master is strict but usually not cruel. It doesn't say bad, wrong, immoral, or anything else in there. It's not against the philosophy. It doesn't mean that you have to practice these things. And very many Goreans don't, but I don't think it's anything wrong with doing it either if you follow that philosophy. So yeah, that's my take on that question. So yeah, I'll refrain from babbling on. Have a great day.